Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of English Unplugged. I'm Clara, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be starting this journey with all of you today.
And I'm Leo. I can't tell you how excited I am to be co-hosting this podcast with the ever-enthusiastic Clara. We've been planning this for months, and it's finally happening.
That's right. English Unplugged is all about helping tourists enhance their English skills in real-world situations. We'll be covering everything from navigating cultural spaces to ordering food, asking for directions, and handling unexpected situations.
Absolutely. And we're not just teaching you textbook phrases. We're going to share the authentic language that real people use when traveling, the kind of English you need when you're actually out there exploring the world.
I still remember when I was in Barcelona last year and this lovely Japanese couple was trying so hard to understand the audio guide at the Picasso Museum. They knew basic English, but were struggling with all the art terminology.
Oh, that reminds me of when I tried to visit the Louvre with just my high school French. I ended up in the Egyptian antiquities section when I was looking for the Mona Lisa.
See, that's exactly why we created this podcast. Today's episode focuses on navigating cultural spaces, museums, and galleries, and we'll be covering essential vocabulary and phrases to make your cultural visits much smoother.
Let's dive right in, shall we?
Our first segment is all about museum entrance essentials. Leo, where do people usually begin their museum visit?
Well, it all starts at the ticket counter or admission desk. That's where you'll need to know phrases like, "I'd like one adult ticket, please," or "Do you offer student discounts?"
And don't forget about asking about opening hours. What time do you open/close? Or are you open on Mondays? Are super useful questions.
Exactly. And for those looking to save a bit of money, you might want to ask, do you have any free admission days? Many museums offer certain days or hours when entry is free or discounted.
That's such a great tip. I remember visiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and I had no idea that their listed prices were actually suggested donations. I could have paid whatever I could afford.
Oh, I didn't know that either. See, these are the kinds of insider tips that can make a huge difference. Another important phrase might be, is photography allowed, since many museums have strict policies about taking pictures.
Absolutely. And don't forget about checking items. You might hear you'll need to check your backpack or large bags must be stored in the cloakroom. Do you know what a cloakroom is, Leo?
It's basically a place where you can leave your coat, umbrella, or bags while you explore the museum. Some places call it a coat check or baggage check. They usually give you a ticket or token that you'll need to retrieve your items later.
Perfect explanation. And if you're a real museum enthusiast, you might want to ask about membership options with something like, do you offer annual memberships? Or what benefits come with membership?
Now let's move on to our second segment, navigating exhibition spaces. Once you're inside the museum, you'll need to find your way around, right?
Definitely. Directional language is so important here. You'll need phrases like, where is the Renaissance collection? Or how do I get to the modern art gallery?
And don't be afraid to ask for a map. Just say, could I have a map, please? Or is there a floor plan available? Most museums have maps in multiple languages.
That's right. Museums can be huge and confusing. I got completely lost in the British Museum last summer, ended up in the ancient Egypt section when I was looking for the Rosetta Stone, which is also Egyptian artifacts, but in a completely different wing.
That place is a maze, but that's where knowing phrases like, I'm looking for, or could you point me toward, really helps. And for specific artwork, you can ask, where can I find Van Gogh's sunflowers? Or which floor is the dinosaur exhibit on?
Exactly. And it's good to know vocabulary for different types of museums, too. You have art museums, natural history museums, science museums, archaeological museums.
Don't forget about specialized museums like automotive museums, maritime museums, or aerospace museums. I visited this amazing railway museum in York, England, and didn't know half the vocabulary for train parts.
That sounds like it was still fun, though. And sometimes you might need to ask about facilities, too, like where are the restrooms or is there a cafe in the museum?
Absolutely essential questions. No one wants to be desperately searching for a bathroom in a 5-story museum.
Moving on to our third segment, art and artifact terminology. This can be really challenging, even for native English speakers.
Totally. Art has its own special vocabulary. For paintings, you might hear terms like oil on canvas, watercolor, portrait, landscape, or still life.
And for sculptures, there's bronze, marble, clay, installation, relief, so many technical terms.
Don't forget about artistic movements too. Renaissance, Baroque, Impressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, each with their own distinct characteristics.
I always mix up my isms. Last year at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, I confidently told my friend we were looking at an expressionist painting, and the gentleman next to us very politely corrected me that it was actually post-impressionist. I was so embarrassed.
Oh, don't feel bad. Even art historians debate these classifications sometimes. But it is helpful to know basic terms like brushstrokes, perspective, composition, and texture when discussing artworks.
Absolutely. And when you're reading those information placards next to artworks, you'll see terms like on loan from, permanent collection, donated by, or recently acquired.
Those placards can be super informative, but sometimes use complex language. If you don't understand something, you can always ask a museum guide or docent.
That's right. And speaking of museum facilities, you might want to know words like gift shop, audio guide rental, information desk, or special exhibition.
Let's talk about our fourth segment, joining museum tours. This can really enhance your museum experience, right, Clara?
Absolutely. Guided tours give you so much more context and interesting stories about the exhibits. You can ask questions like, when does the next English tour start? Or how long is the guided tour?
And don't forget to ask, is there an additional fee for the tour? Because sometimes they're free with admission, but other times there's an extra charge.
Good point. You might also want to know if you need to book in advance. Just ask, do I need to reserve a spot on the tour, or can I join the tour without a reservation?
For those who prefer to go at their own pace, audio guides are fantastic. You can ask, are audio guides available in English? Or how much does an audio guide cost?
I always get audio guides when available. They're usually really well produced and give you so much more information than you'd get just walking around on your own.
Me too, though I had a funny experience at the Prada Museum in Madrid. I accidentally picked up the children's audio guide instead of the adult one and spent half an hour listening to simplified explanations before I realized why everything seemed so basic.
That's hilarious, but probably great for language learners, actually. Speaking of guides, don't be afraid to ask questions during tours. You can say things like, could you tell us more about this painting? Or what makes this artifact significant?
Exactly. And it's perfectly fine to ask a guide to repeat something if you didn't catch it. To say, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Or could you explain that again, please?
Our final segment for today is about cultural rules and etiquette. This is super important because rules can vary from museum to museum and country to country.
Absolutely. The most common rules involve photography. You'll see signs saying no flash photography, photography not permitted, or sometimes photography allowed without flash.
And if you're not sure, just ask, is photography allowed in this section, or may I take pictures of this exhibit?
Other common museum rules involve touching. Generally, you should never touch artworks or artifacts unless there's a sign specifically saying it's an interactive exhibit.
Right. You might see signs saying, please do not touch or do not cross the barrier. And most museums have rules about food and drinks, too.
I learned that one the hard way. I brought a water bottle into the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and a security guard very politely but firmly directed me to the lockers. Water near priceless paintings? Not a good mix.
Exactly. Museums are also usually quiet spaces, especially art museums. You'll often see signs requesting visitors to please speak quietly or silence your phones.
And in crowded museums, it's important to be considerate of other visitors. Don't block displays for too long, and be aware of people trying to see behind you. If someone says, excuse me, they probably want to get a better view.
That's right. Museum etiquette is really about respecting the space, the artworks, and other visitors. And if you're not sure about something, just ask a staff member. They're there to help.
Absolutely. It's always better to ask than to accidentally break a rule.
Well, that brings us to the end of our very first episode of English Unplugged. We've covered so much ground today, from museum entrance vocabulary to art terminology, guided tours, and cultural etiquette.
We sure have. Let's quickly recap some of the key phrases we've learned today. When buying tickets, remember you can ask, do you offer any discounts, or what's included in the admission price?
For navigation, phrases like, where's the Renaissance Gallery, or how do I get to the special exhibition will be super helpful.
And don't be afraid to join tours. Just ask, when does the next English tour start? Or is there an additional fee for the audio guide?
Exactly. And always remember to respect museum rules and etiquette. If in doubt, just ask a staff member for clarification.
I hope our listeners feel more confident about visiting museums and galleries in English-speaking countries now. It's all about having those key phrases ready.
And remember, practice makes perfect. Next time you visit a museum, try using some of these phrases, even if you're a bit nervous. The more you use them, the more natural they'll feel.
Absolutely, and we'd love to hear about your experiences. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with friends who might find it helpful.
Join us next time for episode 2, Exploring Historical Sites and Landmarks, where we'll discuss vocabulary and communication strategies for visiting castles, ancient ruins, monuments, and other historical attractions.
We'll cover everything from booking special tours to understanding architectural terms and historical explanations. It's going to be another language-packed episode.
Until then, keep practicing your English, and remember, every conversation is an opportunity to learn. This is Clara.
And Leo, signing off from English Unplugged. See you next time.
Hello, and welcome back to English Unplugged. I'm Clara.
And I'm Leo. We're so happy you're joining us for our second episode where we'll be exploring historical sites and landmarks.
That's right. Last time we covered museums and galleries, but today we're stepping outside those walls to discover the vocabulary and communication strategies you'll need when visiting castles, monuments, ancient ruins, and other amazing historical attractions.
I'm particularly excited about this one because I'm a bit of a history buff. There's something magical about standing in a place where significant events happened centuries ago, don't you think?
Absolutely. I got goosebumps walking through the Roman Forum last year, just imagining all the historical figures who had walked those same paths. But I definitely would have appreciated knowing more historical vocabulary at the time.
Well, that's what we're here for today. We'll be covering everything from essential historical vocabulary to booking tours, understanding explanations, photography tips, and so much more.
So let's jump right in, shall we?
Our first segment is all about historical site vocabulary. This foundation will help you understand what guides and information panels are talking about when you visit these incredible places.
Exactly. Let's start with terms for different types of historical landmarks. You've got castles, palaces, fortresses, temples, cathedrals, ruins, monuments, memorials, each with their own distinct features and purposes.
Right. And it helps to know the difference. A castle was primarily built for defense, while a palace was mainly a royal residence. Fortress is specifically designed for military defense, and a temple is a place of worship.
Oh, and don't forget about archaeological sites, places like Pompeii or Machu Picchu, where archaeologists have excavated and preserved ancient settlements.
Absolutely. And when describing architectural features, there's a whole specialized vocabulary. You have terms like columns, arches, domes, spires, buttresses, ramparts, moats.
I always mix up my architectural terms. Last summer at Notre Dame Cathedral, viewing it from outside during the restoration, I kept calling the flying buttresses those fancy support things on the sides. My tour guide was very patient with me.
Huh? Well, that's actually a pretty good description of what buttresses do. They support the walls. And speaking of historical periods, that's another important vocabulary area. You've got prehistoric, ancient, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, Victorian.
Mm-hmm. And those terms can vary depending on where you are in the world. What's considered ancient in America might be relatively recent compared to places in Asia or the Middle East.
Exactly. The Colosseum in Rome dates back to 80 CE, while Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts is from the 1600s, both historical but with vastly different timescales.
Understanding historical significance vocabulary is helpful to terms like birthplace of, site of the famous battle of, former residence of, commemorating the event of. These phrases help you grasp why a particular place matters.
Now let's move to our second segment, booking tours and experiences. Claire, have you found that having a guide makes a big difference when visiting historical sites?
Oh, absolutely. A good guide can really bring history to life. And knowing how to arrange these tours is crucial. Basic phrases like, I'd like to book a guided tour, or are there any English tours available today, are super helpful.
And don't forget to ask about specialized tours. Many sites offer different options like, is there a ghost tour of the castle, or do you have any behind-the-scenes tours? Sometimes these give you access to areas not open to the general public.
That's such a good point. At the Tower of London, I splurged on a special early access tour, and we got to see the crown jewels before the crowds arrived. Totally worth asking about.
Nice. It's also important to understand ticket options. You might hear terms like general admission, combo ticket, fast track entry, or skip the line pass. Each offers different benefits and costs.
And definitely clarify what's included. I once bought what I thought was a comprehensive ticket for a castle in Scotland, only to discover the dungeon tour was an extra fee. I was so disappointed. I love a good dungeon.
You and your dungeons, but that's a perfect example of why you should ask questions like, what does this ticket include, or is access to all areas covered in this price?
Exactly. And don't forget about timing questions. How long does the tour last? What time does the last tour start? How frequently do tours depart? These help you plan your day efficiently.
Great point. Some historical sites are massive like Versailles or the Forbidden City and can take an entire day to explore properly. Knowing the tour duration helps you decide if you need to set aside more time.
Our third segment focuses on understanding historical explanations. This can be challenging even for native English speakers because historical discussions often use specialized language.
Absolutely. Historical narratives tend to use their own vocabulary. You'll hear terms like reign, dynasty, conquest, rebellion, restoration, and revolution quite frequently.
And then there's the whole vocabulary around dates and timelines. You'll hear references to centuries, eras, periods, BC/DCE, ADCE. It can get confusing pretty quickly.
Don't remind me. I was at Stonehenge a few years ago, and the guide kept referring to something that happened in the 3rd millennium BCE, and my brain was doing mathematical gymnastics trying to figure out when exactly that was.
I know that feeling. For anyone struggling, remember that BCE means before Common Era and is the same as BC before Christ. So the 3rd millennium BCE would be roughly 3000, 2000 BCE, or about 4000 to 5000 years ago.
Exactly. And you'll also encounter lots of terminology related to restoration and preservation. Words like reconstructed, renovated, preserved, conserved, authentic, replica, all describing how the site has been maintained over time.
That's so important to understand. Sometimes what you're seeing isn't the original structure, but a careful recreation. Like at Knossos Palace in Crete, where many sections are modern reconstructions based on archaeological evidence.
Great example. And then there's vocabulary for historical figures and events. You'll hear about monarchs, emperors, nobles, peasants, clergy, conquests, coronations, assassinations, treaties.
And if you don't understand something, the guide says, it's perfectly fine to ask for clarification. Phrases like, could you explain what a flying buttress is? Or, I'm not familiar with the War of the Roses. Could you give me a brief overview? Are completely acceptable.
Absolutely. Most guides are passionate about history and love when visitors show genuine interest by asking questions. Let's move on to our fourth segment, photography and documentation at historical sites. This is something nearly every tourist wants to do, but there are often specific rules to follow.
Definitely, and these rules can vary dramatically from one place to another. Some sites prohibit photography entirely, others allow it without flash, and some have no restrictions at all.
That's why it's important to know phrases like, is photography permitted here? Or, are there any restrictions on taking photos? And always respect signs showing a camera with a line through it. That means no photos.
I learned that lesson the hard way at a monastery in Greece. I didn't see the small no photography sign and got a very stern lecture from a monk. So embarrassing.
Ooh, that's awkward. But it happens to the best of us. For sites where photography is allowed, it's helpful to know some basic camera terminology in English. Terms like exposure, focus, zoom, wide angle, portrait mode, landscape mode.
And don't forget phrases for asking others to take your photo. Would you mind taking a picture of me, or could you take a photo of us in front of the castle, please? Most tourists are happy to help each other out.
Definitely, and it's nice to offer to reciprocate. I'd be happy to take one of you as well. When I was at the Acropolis last year, I ended up in an impromptu photo exchange with a lovely family from Japan. None of us spoke each other's language well, but we communicated perfectly through gestures and smiles.
That's what I love about traveling. Photography really is a universal language. And speaking of photography, understanding lighting terms can be useful too. You might hear tour guides say things like, this side of the building gets the best light in the morning, or the golden hour just before sunset is ideal for photos here.
And if you're trying to get that perfect shot, you might need to ask about the best vantage points. Questions like, is there a good spot to see the entire structure? Or where can I get the best view of the castle can be really helpful.
Our fifth segment is about engaging with local history. This is where your visit can become truly meaningful as you connect with the stories behind the stones and structures.
Absolutely. Local guides often have fascinating insights that you won't find in guidebooks. Learning to ask thoughtful questions can really enhance your experience.
Questions like, what do local people think about this historical site? Or, are there any local legends associated with this place? Can uncover amazing stories.
I love asking about how historical sites feature in local life today. At Stonehenge, our guide told us how modern-day Druids still celebrate the solstice there, something I'd never have known without asking.
That's fascinating. I had a similar experience at a small castle in Ireland. The guide mentioned that his grandfather had actually worked there as a gardener when it was still a private residence. His personal connection made the history feel so immediate.
That's exactly the kind of local perspective that makes travel special. It's also good to learn phrases for expressing interest in these stories, like, that's fascinating, or I had no idea, or could you tell me more about that?
And vocabulary related to cultural significance is important too. Terms like heritage, tradition, customs, ritual, symbolic meaning, cultural identity. These help you understand why certain sites matter so deeply to local communities.
Right. And historical sites often have connections to traditional practices. Understanding terms like festival, ceremony, pilgrimage, commemoration, anniversary helps you grasp how the past connects to present cultural activities.
I remember visiting Notre Dame Cathedral before the fire and learning about all the religious ceremonies and national events that had taken place there over centuries. It made me realize it wasn't just a tourist attraction, but a living part of French cultural identity.
Exactly. And that's why asking respectful questions about these traditions and customs can really deepen your appreciation of a historical site. Just remember to be sensitive. Some topics might be sacred or painful parts of local history. Our final segment today is about navigating outdoor historical sites. This is really practical information that can make or break your visit.
Oh, definitely. Weather-related vocabulary is essential here. Many historical sites are partially or completely outdoors, so understanding forecasts and conditions is crucial.
Right. Terms like sunny, overcast, drizzle, downpour, gusty, humid, scorching. These all described different weather conditions that might affect your visit.
And phrases for asking about weather preparedness are important too. Questions like, is there shelter if it rains? Or are there shaded areas? Can help you plan appropriately.
I learned that lesson at Ephesus in Turkey. It was 95 degrees, blazing sun, and virtually no shade among the ancient ruins. I got the worst sunburn of my life because I didn't think to ask if I should bring an umbrella for shade.
Ouch! I've made similar mistakes. Now, I always ask about terrain and landscape features before visiting outdoor historical sites. Understanding terms like steep, uneven, rocky, paved, hillside, cliff, valley, these help you know what to expect.
And don't forget accessibility vocabulary. Phrases like, is this site wheelchair accessible, or are there many stairs, or how strenuous is the walk? These are important for visitors with mobility considerations.
Absolutely essential. I was with my mom who uses a cane at Machu Picchu, and while we'd researched extensively, we still had to ask lots of specific questions about which paths were manageable for her.
That's so important. Safety vocabulary is crucial too, especially at more rugged sites. Understanding terms like restricted area, danger, caution, unstable, slippery when wet, mind your step, keep back from the edge. These could literally save you from injury.
Definitely. And for ancient sites or ruins specifically, there might be special precautions. Phrases like, don't climb on the ruins, stay on the marked paths, or don't remove any artifacts are common warnings you might hear.
Right. I remember at Pompeii, they were very strict about staying on designated paths to protect the fragile archaeological remains. Understanding and respecting these instructions is part of being a responsible visitor.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode on exploring historical sites and landmarks. We've covered so much ground, from essential historical vocabulary to booking special tours and understanding those complex historical explanations.
We've also discussed photography etiquette, engaging with local history, and navigating those sometimes challenging outdoor sites. I hope our listeners feel more prepared to make the most of their historical adventures.
Exactly. Let's quickly recap some key phrases that might come in handy. When booking tours, remember you can ask, what's included in this ticket? Or how long does the tour last?
For understanding historical explanations, don't be afraid to ask for clarification with phrases like, could you explain what that term means? Or, I'm not familiar with that historical period.
For photography, always check first with, is photography permitted here? And for local engagement, questions like, are there any local legends about this place? Can uncover fascinating stories.
And don't forget about practical concerns at outdoor sites. Questions like, is there shelter if it rains, or how difficult is the terrain, can save you from unpleasant surprises.
Absolutely. The key is to be curious, respectful, and prepared. Historical sites offer amazing windows into the past, and having the right vocabulary makes that experience so much richer.
I couldn't agree more, and we'd love to hear about your experiences visiting historical sites. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with friends who might find it helpful.
Join us next time for Episode 3, Effective Communication with Locals and Guides, where we'll dive into the art of meaningful conversations during your travels. We'll cover everything from breaking the ice with locals to asking thoughtful questions and navigating potential language barriers.
We'll also discuss cultural sensitivity in conversations, digital translation tools, and strategies for adapting to different regional accents. It's going to be packed with practical communication tips.
Until then, keep practicing your English, explore some amazing historical sites if you can, and remember, every conversation is an opportunity to learn. This is Clara.
And Leo, signing off from English Unplugged. Happy traveling, everyone.